Have you ever wondered why the entertainment industry, when it releases something nowadays, always seems to make some giant fumble in the PR department, and all of a sudden half the world is now mad at whatever they're putting out? These are multi-million dollar corporations at this point. How is it that they're screwing up basic PR this badly? Well, they're actually not messing it up. Well, not from their perspective. See, the goal of these statements, when it seems to be such a left field take and it's just going to upset people, is to upset people. Because what it does is it engages their audience. It causes them to talk about whatever it is they're releasing more than they would have otherwise. So let's get into how to engage your audience and when you should and should not use certain techniques. So let's start with the basic premise. What does engaging your audience look like? Well, engaging your audience is the ability to convince whatever your audience is to continue to talk about or think about whatever you're providing them beyond its initial consumption. So, for example, if you're watching a movie, then if people go out of the movie theater and they're still talking about it, you've engaged your audience. If they leave the theater and they stop talking about it, you have failed to engage your audience. That's kind of the basic premise of this situation. So I tend to sort this engagement into one of three categories, and that is positive engagement, negative engagement, and tangential engagement. So let's start with the first example I used, negative engagement. This is when something has gone on and your audience is mad about something. They have a negative emotion, it's a negative reaction. And what this does is it causes your audience to dislike something, but because they dislike it, they want to express their dislike of it, and thus it reaches a further audience basically through mutual hatred. Now, the obvious downside of this is that people dislike what you've put out. It seems to be universally a bad idea, right? Well, not necessarily. You see, despite the fact that everyone may hate whatever you've put out, they're still talking about it. And at some point, everyone else wants to know what's so bad about this. If everyone won't shut up about it, how can it be so bad, so dangerous, so upsetting that they just won't shut up about how much they hate it, and now you have a new audience that's effectively going to hate watch your show. So understand though, this is easily hits the law of diminishing returns very quickly. You cannot build a franchise off of people hating your franchise, because at some point they just realize that they're going to hate your franchise and they'll stop watching it, and that point happens fairly quickly. That said, if you're doing a one-off show, like say you're trying to do a reboot of It and you're just trying to make one movie, then this could actually work really well because you don't care about continuing returns, you just care about this one movie. So moving on to positive engagement, this is when people talk about what they liked about the movie. And if you wind back time back to the original Avatar, it topped box offices. It was the highest grossing movie of all time, and nobody remembers the story because it is the most generic and bland story you've ever seen. But it was also a stunning visual display, and the first time that 3D was used to such good effect. So effectively, instead of trying to make 3D the forefront, the main selling point, it was a background supporting material. And that had never been done, and it was done to a stunning effect. So that's what caused it to be such a high-grossing film, and that's what everybody talked about. Now, this is much easier to build a franchise off of because people will remember what was talked about. And if you're here a decade later saying, hey, we want to make Avatar 2, everybody goes, well, I don't really remember what the story of Avatar 1 was, but I really liked it. You're like, all right, we're going to put out an Avatar 2. We're going to focus on what was good, which was the stunning visuals. And nobody's going to care about the storyline because it wasn't anything that anybody cared about in the first one. So we're just going to market the visuals. And you do, and you make a ton of money off of it. Now, obviously, this is much more difficult to do because getting someone to like something is much more difficult than getting someone to hate something. One side comment, everybody's frothing at the mouth, but you have to do a dozen things right for them to actually enjoy something. Now, when you do get your general audience to like something this much, you get a situation where they will eclipse all negative conversations. It doesn't matter. Nothing else will be able to make it because people do like to like things much more than they like to hate things. So finally, moving on to tangential engagement. This is going to be the situation where it is only sort of related to whatever you put out. And the best example for this is going to be the themed cookbooks. So if you have like a Star Trek cookbook or a Star Wars cookbook or a Marvel cookbook laying around or whatever, that's what I would call tangential engagement. It has no impact from the actual story, but it has been purchased and produced and received specifically because it has your brand title on it. And this is something that's extremely difficult to sell. It's easy to produce because it's entirely tangential. It doesn't have to do anything with it. But to actually sell it, you have to get people that like things. So you have to have positive engagement. And second, you have to have what's called staying power. So if we go back to Avatar, it was this massively bright flash, topped out of the box office, and then it was gone. And because it vanished just almost immediately, you can't sell thousands of cookbooks off of it. You just can't do the kind of things you need to do to get this tangential engagement because it was a one-hit wonder. Now, if you go on the opposite side, if you take Star Trek or Star Wars or Marvel that have been around for decades, constantly putting out shows, it's actually really easy to do this because they are franchises, because it's something that's been around and you have people that are growing up, and they can reasonably expect that this tangential object, it's a cookbook in this instance, that this cookbook will be relevant to people's consciousness 10 years from now. They can say, oh, I've got a Marvel cookbook in 3-4 years, and like, hey, this is the Captain America cake, and people will be like, oh, hey, cool, that's actually really cool because it's a franchise that's still relevant. And Avatar was not. So hilariously, this is actually fairly easy to pull off despite needing some setup, and the reason for it is because all you have to do is just keep making stuff. I know it said it requires positive engagement, but that positive engagement doesn't need to be very high. Even a small amount will allow you to do a couple of these. So in reality, what you need is something that continues. You just need to continue producing whatever you're doing. Because as long as you're producing it, somebody will like it. There are enough people in the world. It doesn't matter what you do, someone's going to like it. You just have to keep it relevant. So in conclusion, we have negative engagement, which is easy to do, but will destroy a franchise. We have positive engagement, which is much more difficult, but can eclipse everything else. And then we have tangential engagement, which really, as long as you're continuing to produce, you can do this. So, that's my 2 cents for today. Y'all have a good night.